Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Alabama heading into 2025. It's one of those programs that I left the 2024 season with some massive question marks about what this team is going to be going into the 2025 year. And the more work you do with this football team, the more you dig into this roster, the more you realize, look, that there are question marks about this Alabama team going into 2025. I don't think any Alabama fan listening to this would argue that. The thing you really recognize is there are so many potential answers regarding this Alabama football team that, look, are they my pick sitting here in May to go out and win a national championship? No. But you start looking at this roster, you start looking at the things that you like about this football team and say, look, if things come together, this is certainly a team that we're sitting in the back end of October saying, hey, they can make a run in the college football playoffs. What needs to happen with Alabama in 2025? What do we think makes this team national championship caliber? That's the conversation I want to get into. Now, before we do, and as always, to the Alabama fans after the spring portal, after spring practice, kind of have a feeling of what this team's going to look like. I would love to hear the expectations that the Alabama fans have for 2025, where look, the college football playoff should be the expectation. I think this team should be making a run. At least that's kind of the way I look at this roster. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. One more thing, Dill, this is the first time we have aired the post-spring depth chart. Any changes that you guys would like to make or would like to see be made, please let it fly in the comment section. Dill, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, let's start with this Alabama offense. Ryan Grubb coming back with Kalen DeBoer, I think, is a storyline that not enough people are talking about. General take on this Alabama offense heading into 2025.
I think probably the big thing you're looking for is maybe to get back to what Washington looked like a little bit more with that
Yes.
passing attack. Because that's when Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer were at their best. It was with Penix and those wide receivers. And frankly, you look at the skill sets, the wide receiver room is definitely in place. And I'm not even sure necessarily who's going to be the starters. Like Jalen Hale is a guy who I don't feel like gets any attention.
Yep.
Go back to pre-injury. And if he can get back to form, he is awesome. You obviously got some young guys like Lotsier Brooks. But obviously, like Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton as like your top three, at least right now, really feels like you have the skill set to be what Washington kind of was. I think all three are pretty versatile, can all stretch the field a little bit, can all play from the slot. And that, again, that was what Washington sort of had. So that's probably the first thing you're looking for. And then do you have a quarterback in Ty Simpson or Keelan Russell? It sounds like those two are kind of battling it out, if you will, who can maybe implement that passing attack a little bit more effectively than Jalen.
Look, here's my take on, and everybody's going to have their take on the potential of the Alabama quarterback play. My take's pretty simple. You got two 5-star guys in Ty Simpson and Keelan Russell. You got a hand-picked guy in Austin Mack, who Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb picked at Washington. It's a very talented quarterback room. And whoever does win the job is going to have all the pieces around them to have success, along with Ryan Grubb coming back to Kalen DeBoer. I'm kind of working off the blind assumption that I think the quarterback play is going to be pretty solid for Alabama. Now, what needs to come together around? You made a really good point. This wide receiver room does remind you of the skill sets that they had with Washington because of all the diversity of skill sets that you have. I mean, you have your big-bodied X-wide receiver that can work vertically in Isaiah Horton. You have Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams with a laundry list of other young, talented wide receivers that can move around the football field and attack defenses from a lot of different spots. It reminds you of how we talked about that Washington wide receiver room in the 2023 year. Can we talk about the offensive line? This unit has to play better in the 2025 year, and I think it can play better. I look at the names, what this offensive line is made up of, and say this should, and we had them as the number 10 offensive line in the country going into 2025. I think they are very capable of being a top 10 unit. Can they and will they in 2025 is one of those storylines that kind of, I feel like, differentiates Alabama from just being a really solid college football playoff team and then a national championship caliber team. Depends on how well this offensive line comes
to me,
together.
you got two guys in Caden Proctor and Jaden Roberts who are
NFL
really
defense.
high-end players. And then
Yes.
Parker Brailsford, I mean, he's
Very
really,
good
really
too.
solid in his own right. And Gino Vandermark, to me, I feel like I hear the Cam Dewberry battle with him. I really do think Gino's going to win that. I thought he played really well
He
last
did.
year when he was on the field for that Bama team. So you really have your one question, and it's a big one because Wilkin Formby really struggled last year. My like what I'm kind of excited to see is how Arkell can fit into this mix because he's a hard one to get a read on because he didn't play a ton coming from Ball State, I believe, and like even just trying to find games of his on the internet, not the easiest thing in the world. So like I'm kind of like patching highlight clips
Yes.
together and whatnot. But there is a very interesting skill set, like on the raw side, but really athletic, good size, which you're kind of looking for the tackle spot. Again, you probably hope Wilkin Formby can develop and they can kind of get him rolling, if you will.
Yeah.
But I am interested to see how Arkell can fit into that battle because Wilkin Formby definitely was not quite good enough last year.
Yeah,
To
the
be
fact that
guy.
he couldn't really emerge to start out there with Elijah Pritchett struggling the way he did was a concern. Can I say one more thing? And I know that Jalen Milroe had his moments of making the offensive line maybe look good because of his ability to extend plays and get outside the pocket. I think the vice versa is actually probably a little bit more true. Jalen Milroe's ability to manage a pocket, I don't think was all that great. And I think he made the offensive line at times look worse than it might have been because of how skittish he was in there. Like if you get quarterback play that's a little bit better, and look, you don't have the athlete that Jalen Milroe was. We all know that. But do you have a quarterback that can manage the pocket a little bit better and make this offensive line right more times than they were last year? I think it's another interesting conversation. How about the run game? This unit's massive. It's one of the bigger and more physical offensive lines that you see in the entire country. When you start looking down at these weights, I mean, Caden Proctor, Jaden Roberts, Wilcom Formby, Gino Vandermark, Cam Dewberry, they're all big physical dudes. How well can Alabama lean on the run game absence of Jalen Milroe's legs is a question mark.
And then your question probably is how good is this running back room? Because you don't really know that you have that guy. I mean, Jam
Yeah,
Miller's been solid for sure. I'm not trying to
I
like
agree.
take anything away, but is he a premier starting SEC running
No,
back?
I don't think so.
That's kind of the interesting one. So like
Yeah,
what are you going to get from some of those young guys? Like you have a ton of talent in this room. I
yeah,
feel like someone should be able to emerge. And yeah, I'm not necessarily saying Jam Miller doesn't have a role for this team, but are they going to get like
yeah.
top end SEC running back play? That's going to be a big one because I think you're right. This is a team that I think you'd like to see be able to run the ball, if for nothing else, be able to protect maybe your issues at that right tackle spot in pass
Well,
protection.
that's the key. Like you want to run the football, so you stay out of those 3rd and 8 situations where these elite edge rushers in the SEC are teeing off on a guy like Wilcom Formby. You kind of want to stay out of those situations. Defensive side of the football, Dill, I probably owe an apology to K Momack. Like probably a little hard on this. And look, there were spots where it got ugly, like the Vanderbilt game, the second half of the Georgia. There were portions of their stretches, I should say, of this Alabama defense where like this is a disaster. This ain't good enough. You go back and look at the overall numbers and like the sum of the season probably was a little too hard. I mean, they were top 10 in the country, only allowing 18.3 points per game. They only allowed 4.6 yards per play, which was also top 10 in the country. Here's where, at least in my opinion, I think you're going to agree with this. Here's where this Alabama defense goes from, actually much better than many of us thought last year to great. This defensive line. I mean, they only sacked the quarterback 6% of dropbacks. That was 66 in the country. When's the last time this Alabama defense was outside of the top 20 in sack percentage? Probably not now. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm just going to assume that under Nick Saban, that didn't happen very often. We know this Alabama defense for dominating opponents along the line of scrimmage, being really good against the run and getting after the passer. Do you have that premier difference maker? Do you have that premier defensive line to do that in 2025? If there was one thing that I feel like holds this football team back in 2025, it is how much can you dominate up front? How well can you create negative plays? Because I look at it and say you have some guys you like. The overall talent's a question, but for me, it's a little bit of the depth too. Like how many guys do we trust to play significant snaps for Alabama in 2025? That's where I'm looking at for this Alabama defense going
And
into
it's so important because this back seven, if you will, is so good.
so
I mean,
good.
this secondary, they're returning pretty much everybody. Keon Sabb coming back, being healthy. Like that secondary probably is going to be one of the best units in the country.
Yes.
I look like you want to take the ball away a little bit more and let them be more impactful, if you will. Yeah, it is going to start with that pass rush because the only guy so far who's been dependable is LT Overton. And you'd certainly like to see his sack numbers come up. He's getting after it. He was pretty disruptive, but not a huge sack guy. I'm looking at James Smith. I think James Smith is that guy to me who is so talented. He's a really, really good athlete, maybe a little bit on the small side, but really good athlete, gets off the ball quickly. He's one that I look at like, can his pass rush game, can he just get a little bit stronger? Can he take that pass rush to the next level? And then another guy I feel like no one talks about because like we like talk about Rousseau and Pierre and Keeley. Jordan Renaud, I think is awesome. Like I think he is a very, very good player. I'm looking for him to have a good year. But honestly, it's probably Q Rousseau, like Urquhart Rousseau. Like he's the guy who, I mean, you feel like you haven't quite seen it yet.
Here's the thing: is like, who's gonna step up and become like all SEC caliber, and then how many of these guys are going to as well? I don't know if you have a top 10 NFL draft pick, maybe LT Overton, and that's not necessarily what matters. It's like how many of these guys take that step. Because you look at a guy like Keon, or you look at a guy like Jan Zapier, those guys can be in this conversation too. You almost hope for Alabama to develop those waves of defensive lines that they had under Nick Saban, where the 2s and 3s that were trotting out there in rotation were also dominant football players. Like that's the recipe. When Alabama's a national championship caliber football team, it has a large part to do with dominating teams for 4 quarters of a football game. I think you just have question marks about how deep this football team is. But you said it, the back end is incredible. It starts with the linebacker room, which I think is very, very, very talented. And then you look at this back end and say, I wonder how creative Kane Womack can be with his blitz packages, because you have guys on the boundary that you are very comfortable leaving on islands. I've heard great things about Dejoun Lee. I know Cam Calhoun's coming over from Utah is a really good football player. When you have cornerbacks that you trust on islands, where I don't think Alabama was quite there last year. We knew how talented they were, but they were kind of young and still coming on. Going into 2025, I think you have a lot of confidence you might have the best secondary in the country. Does that allow you to kind of maybe compensate for, and I don't want to use the word lackluster front seven, but a front seven that maybe is not national championship caliber, because it certainly could be that possibility.
And even just like having this unit a little bit more gelled, because really the only issues at times for the secondary was us. I mean, you think about that South Carolina game, like giving up that big play. I think it was at the end of the half. Like that's the type of play that lets South Carolina get back in that game, make that game way closer than it needed to be. A couple of those instances in the Georgia game, obviously in the second half. But that unit did start to tighten the screws, I felt like, towards the end of last year, really dialed it in. And again, you're just running it back with the same group. So I look, that secondary, I think, you'd like to think that they can get a little bit more creative. And again, you don't necessarily want to have to rely on the blitz. But I think when you're just looking pure personnel, you got really good linebackers. You got athletic linebackers, especially Deontay Lawson, who I think can be part of that pass rush. And you're going to need someone to be disruptive in ways to get quarterbacks off their spot a little bit. So I'm kind of with you. I wouldn't be surprised to see them get creative with that blitz packaging because, again, you certainly hope you get some development, but probably to me, you got to see it to believe it.
It's just play to your strength. You know, your strength is your back end. So your back end allows you to be aggressive. Go out and be aggressive. Last year was so much new. You know, it was like not only a brand new coaching staff, and it was like exceptionally new because it went from like Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer, and that is, we all know that's a big change. And yeah, Damani Jackson was a portal guy. Xavier Brown was a true freshman. Keon Sabb was a portal guy. There's just so many new faces, coaching staff, players, just based on continuity. Like, look at this starting defense. There's not a single colored name. Like, you're running it back with a lot of guys that played significant football last year. Can it take a step with the continuity too? Dill, I'm probably sleeping on Alabama a little. And again, I'm not picking them to win the SEC right now or picking them to win a national championship, but there are some.
Well, there's like a handful, like their wide receiver room, elite, back end,
Oh,
elite.
they
Like
have
there are
elite talent.
some parts of this team that are like top 3 units, I'd say, in the country, and
Yes.
probably make case for both those units. So again, they certainly have some real power units, if you will.
Hmm.
To me, it's so heavily dependent on young defensive linemen. Like I didn't even talk like Jeremiah Beeman, I think is an exciting product. Like if you can get him, James Smith, get a Keon Keeley or Jans or Quad to really start playing at a high level, and just one or two of them really, I
Yeah.
think we have a really good team. But again, that's a big if because you haven't quite seen it from those guys, and they're
And
starting to get deep enough into their career, especially on the edge,
yeah.
that it's
And let's be straight up, like the dominant defensive lines correlate with national
yeah.
championships. It's not only Alabama that's worked with. Like you look at when Georgia was winning national titles, you look when Michigan won, you look at even that
Ohio
Ohio
State
State
last
team
year.
last year. And that's the most frustrating part about Ohio State is everybody wants to talk about Jeremiah Smith, and he's awesome. My reasoning of why Ohio State won it all was that defensive line was elite, top 5 against the run, number 1 in sack percentage. Can Alabama get close? We don't need it to be number 1 in the country, but can you be top 10? I think you have a shot. You got to go make it happen if you want to win a national championship. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.